You ever have one of those mornings where you step outside, expecting a quiet backyard, a little sunshine, maybe a cup of coffee, and suddenly your peace is gone? That was me. I walked out to check the fence, and there it was again. Shirts, socks, towels, someone had used my fence as their clothesline. Again. And not just a couple of items. No, this was a full-on laundry invasion. It's like the fence wasn't even mine, like it had magically become public property overnight. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was just one or two items. But no, it was clearly deliberate. Someone thought, oh, that fence. Totally fine for my laundry. Who cares whose property it is? And I have to admit, the first feeling was pure disbelief. The second feeling? A mix of frustration, fury, and, well, a little humor, because the absurdity was staggering. I mean, who does that? The neighbors, of course, were conveniently invisible. I knew it was them. They've had this habit for weeks, sneaking over, tossing laundry over the fence, thinking no one notices. And the audacity. They didn't even ask, didn't even apologize. Just treated my property like an extension of their backyard convenience. And the worst part? My pride. This fence wasn't just a divider. It was my space, my boundary, and suddenly it felt like a revolving door for socks and towels. I paced the yard, thinking, call them, complain? Maybe complain to the HOA? Sure, I could do that. But that feels weak. Passive, not satisfying. And if I'm being honest, satisfying is exactly what I want. So I started imagining solutions. Creative, clever, a little dramatic, but completely legal. And that's when a plan started forming in my mind. I grabbed a notebook and a pen, sketching out the fence line. What if every inch of it became uninviting for laundry? Harmless, yes, but unforgettable. Maybe some subtle deterrents, clever little annoyances, maybe even a few humorous signs. Nothing dangerous, nothing illegal, but enough to make anyone think twice before tossing another sock over. And as I wrote, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity. The same neighbors who treat the fence like a public utility would now find it impossible to use. I paced again, sipping coffee, planning. Every detail mattered. Where to place deterrents, how to make the fence visually less inviting for laundry, how to maximize psychological impact while staying perfectly safe. And I realized that this was going to be fun. Not mean, not cruel, just clever. And in a small way, poetic justice. By mid-morning, I had a rough blueprint. Some subtle spikes, not sharp, just enough to make draping a towel uncomfortable. A few signs, humorous, sarcastic, exaggerated warnings. And strategically placed obstacles that would prevent anyone from casually tossing laundry over. The fence was about to become the last place anyone would want to hang anything. And as I looked at the sketch, I felt that first surge of satisfaction. Neighbors might peek out their windows soon, curious about what I'm doing. Maybe they'll see the subtle setup, maybe not. Either way, the plan is set. And in my mind, I can already see the reactions. Hesitation, frustration, mild panic, a little humor. The perfect combination. This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about teaching a lesson with creativity, style, and subtlety. And that's where part one ends. The discovery, the frustration, and the first spark of clever, strategic revenge. Part two will escalate as I implement the deterrents. The neighbors realize their convenience has ended, and the drama peaks in a quiet, funny, suburban showdown. By mid-morning, the plan was ready. The fence, my humble boundary line, was about to become legendary. I started with the subtle obstacles, small, harmless deterrents that made hanging laundry inconvenient. Not dangerous, not illegal, but perfectly irritating. I set up gentle spikes along the top rails, ones that wouldn't hurt anyone, but would make a towel slide off instantly if they tried. I placed quirky, sarcastic signs, private fence, laundry-free zone, and trespassers will face sock karma. And strategically, I added small, uneven planks and garden items along the base, ensuring that trying to reach over would become awkward and slightly comical. Neighbors were starting to notice. Some peeked from windows, whispering to each other, eyes wide with curiosity. One elderly woman across the street muttered, "What is he up to now?" Another teen laughed quietly, filming from a window. Perfect. The subtle audience adds a layer of suspense and humor. And all the while, I moved deliberately, adjusting, testing each deterrent. This was as much a performance as it was a boundary enforcement. The first bold neighbor approached with a laundry basket. I was inside, peeking through the window, and I could see him hesitating. He steps up, thinking he'll just toss a shirt over like always. And then it happens. The first towel slips off the spikes. The awkward balance forces him to crouch, fumble, and the sign catches his eye. "Sock karma," he mutters under his breath. His confidence falters instantly. I smile quietly, imagining the whispered stories that will travel back to his spouse and neighbors. A second neighbor follows, more curious than cautious, trying to imitate the first. And just like that, the awkwardness spreads. They attempt to hang a sheet, but the uneven planks at the bottom trip up their feet, the towel keeps sliding, and they step back, muttering, realizing the fence has become unexpectedly inhospitable. The comedy is perfect, subtle, clever, and entirely satisfying. I step outside for a moment, just enough to make sure everything looks natural. The spikes are visible but harmless. The signs are clear but humorous. The uneven planks look like a gardening experiment. It all comes together, a perfectly orchestrated, legal, and highly amusing deterrent. And I can already feel the legend forming in the neighborhood. People will talk about this. They'll laugh, they'll be impressed, and they'll understand the boundary has been set. As the morning progresses, neighbors try repeatedly. Each attempt is met with mild inconvenience, awkward fumbling, and subtle humiliation. The fence, which once served as a convenient laundry line, has now become a quiet monument to cleverness and patience. And I step back, sipping coffee, narrating quietly to my phone. Observe how respect is enforced in a subtle, nonviolent, yet highly effective way. Witness the transformation of a simple fence into an uninviting, unforgettable barrier. Even the HOA gets wind of the commotion. A representative arrives, probably expecting a petty argument or a minor dispute. Instead, they find a fence adorned with sarcastic signs, carefully placed deterrents, and neighbors whispering and chuckling. The official pauses, tilts their head, clearly trying to process the scene. And that's when I realized the strategy worked perfectly, not just for the neighbors, but for anyone who might have thought the fence was fair game. The high point comes when one particularly confident neighbor decides to test the fence with a full load of laundry. He stretches, balances, and instantly, everything slides off. The spikes, the uneven planks, and the slight slope work together like a perfectly timed comedy sketch. He steps back, eyes wide, muttering something about impossible and never again. I can't help but chuckle, imagining the story spreading down the block. Throughout the day, the fence stands firm as a quiet, clever monument to boundaries. The neighbors are cautious now, hesitant, and the aura of humor combined with mild embarrassment ensures compliance without confrontation. The drama peaks not through yelling or escalation, but through subtle, intelligent design. And I watch from the porch, calm, satisfied, occasionally narrating quietly. Sometimes the best revenge is patience, creativity, and just enough awkwardness to make the point. By late afternoon, the fence has done its job. The neighbors have given up. Their laundry neatly stowed away elsewhere, the HOA nodding in reluctant approval. I walk along the fence, inspecting the setup. Everything's still in place, everything subtle but effective. The message is clear. Respect this boundary, or face minor, clever consequences. And it's delivered without a single lawsuit, argument, or escalation. Even the birds seem to notice. A few perch on the spikes, carefully avoiding contact, adding their own comedic timing to the scene. A cat from next door creeps along the top of the fence, testing each obstacle before jumping down in exasperation. The animal's reactions, unintentional but perfect, add another layer of humor and relatability, the kind of thing that would make a great YouTube shot. Neighbors now linger, commenting, laughing quietly, pointing out clever elements. One whispers, "He really thought of everything." Another says, "Finally someone taught them." It's surreal, absurd, and completely satisfying. And through all of this, I realize that the lesson isn't just about laundry. It's about boundaries, creativity, subtle enforcement, and the power of humor in everyday suburban life. By sunset, the fence stands quiet, uninviting, and legendary. No laundry has been hung all day. The neighbors know it, the HOA knows it, and I know it. Subtle, clever, legal, hilarious, the perfect solution to a frustrating problem. And the story isn't just mine. It's a story the neighborhood will remember, retell, and maybe even exaggerate over time. And that's where part 2 ends. The fence fully transformed, neighbors flustered, HOA observing, subtle poetic justice delivered, and humor at its peak. Part 3 will show aftermath, reflection, and an open-ended call to action for the audience. By late afternoon, the fence had fully earned its reputation. The subtle spikes, uneven planks, and humorous signs had done their work. The neighbors were hesitant, cautious, and slightly embarrassed. No one dared toss another sock, towel, or shirt over that line. The fence had become, without a single argument or confrontation, the last place anyone would think to hang laundry. And I couldn't help but smile quietly at the effectiveness of it all. The HOA representative returned, probably hoping to see a petty dispute resolved, or maybe expecting me to have overreacted. Instead, they found a fence adorned with clever deterrents and humorous warnings. Their expression shifted from suspicion to cautious amusement. They realized, I think, that the fence now had a quiet authority of its own, legal, harmless, and undeniable, and there was nothing they could say to reverse it. Neighbors began trickling out of their homes, some whispering, some laughing quietly. I wouldn't dare, one muttered, glancing at the spikes. Brilliant, another whispered. Some filmed discreetly on their phones, eager to share the story later. And that's when I realized the real magic of the day. Subtle, clever enforcement combined with humor was more effective than confrontation or drama. Everyone knew the rule now, and it stuck. I walked along the fence, inspecting my handiwork. Every spike, every plank, every sign was exactly as intended. The message was clear: this is private property. Respect it, or face mild but unforgettable consequences. And it was delivered without malice, without breaking a single law, and with just enough humor to make it memorable. Even the local wildlife seemed to sense the change. Birds perched cautiously on the top spikes, testing the new surface before hopping off. A neighbor's cat tried to traverse the fence but quickly reconsidered, leaping down in exasperation. Their reactions added an unplanned, yet perfectly comedic layer to the story. It was as if nature itself was acknowledging the new rules. By sunset, the fence had achieved legend status in our small community. The neighbors had learned their lesson, the HOA had witnessed the clever boundary enforcement, and the property was fully respected once again. The subtle poetic justice had been delivered, effective, humorous, and memorable. I leaned against the fence one last time, reflecting on the day. What started as a minor frustration had become a demonstration of creativity, patience, and subtle power. I didn't need to yell, argue, or call lawyers. I had simply observed, planned, and executed a clever solution that everyone, neighbors, HOA, and even the local wildlife, understood and respected. And yet, the story isn't over. There's always that lingering what if. What if someone else tries to use the fence? What if a new neighbor doesn't understand the humor or subtlety? That open-ended tension is part of what keeps the story alive, fueling whispers, debates, and online commentary. The narrative lives on, in conversations, retellings, and maybe even a few exaggerated tales over time. So I turned to the camera, or my imagined audience, and asked quietly, what would you do if someone kept using your property without permission? Would you comply, argue endlessly, or get creative like this? And I let the question hang because there's no single correct answer. There's only cleverness, patience, and the understanding that subtle, nonviolent action can be the most satisfying solution. By the end of the day, the fence had become more than wood and nails. It had become a symbol of boundaries, creativity, and quiet power. The lesson was clear: respect property, respect people, and sometimes the most memorable lessons are delivered with humor, ingenuity, and a touch of mischief. Neighbors left, HOA officers departed, and the yard was finally quiet. The subtle deterrents stood silently, and I realized that the oak trees, the spikes, and the signs had created a story that would be remembered and retold. Not just for the practical lesson, but for the cleverness, the humor, and the artistry of enforcing respect without confrontation.